I know.
It's good.
And their group here in the front is a GLBT organization. They're going to film the presentation. That's
Good.
pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
High school?
I don't know.
I think it is. I think some of these are high
I
school.
mean, if I were guessing, I would say yeah, but didn't everybody look
Yeah, I
CLB?
know,
So,
right?
yeah, so
Okay, I don't know if anybody's going to tell us to go, but it's 10:15, so we can probably just go.
sounds like a plan.
Ready? Good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for being here this morning. I will be introducing Dr. Arrowsmith. I'm Dr. Kirsten Havig with the Division of Social Work here at University of Wyoming. And just a quick explanation here. I came here from Tulsa, Oklahoma, from working with the School of Social Work there. And Dr. Arrowsmith has been a critical and wonderful part of my own education about providing good care to trans people, understanding trans people, and building social work services that are responsive to the trans population. So I'm so pleased that she was able to join us here at the University of Wyoming. Dr. Arrowsmith is a physician, transgender activist from Tulsa. She attended medical school at the Kansas City University of Medicine and Biosciences, did her residency at Oklahoma State. She's a member of the board of directors for the National Center for Transgender Equality, as well as the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. Excuse me. She's a frequent lecturer on transgender issues, including last night with our own medical students here in the WWAMI program with the College of Health Sciences, who were very interested and receptive to what she had to say, which was wonderful, training that next generation of healthcare providers to provide good care for transgender people. She currently right now operates a clinic, one of the only places in the large state of Oklahoma where trans folks can receive care, called the South Winds Women's Center in Oklahoma City. She's had multiple honors. She was a Woman of Moxie in Tulsa in 2015 and recognized for her activism by Freedom Oklahoma with their prestigious Torch Award. She's been invited to the White House as part of the National Pride Celebration in recognition of her commitment to equality, volunteerism, trans rights, and human rights. So join me in welcoming Dr. Arrowsmith.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to start with discussing some of the basics of transgender so that we have some shared language because the terminology can be kind of tricky sometimes. So transgender is a term that includes anyone who has any feelings about themselves that are different than their birth sex. And there are a bunch of different ways you can be transgender. Transgender people are born with this internal feeling that we don't quite fit into the gender binary of only male or only female. Here are the ways one can be transgender. Some of us, like me, are transsexual. I'll explain that a little bit more in a minute. Another category of transgender are people who are cross-dressers. Cross-dressers typically are people who find emotional comfort or calmness or peace in dressing in the clothing of the opposite gender. They don't typically want to take hormones or have any body-changing surgery, and they just cross-dress part of the time usually. Drag kings and drag queens are people who dress in the clothing of the opposite gender to do performances. They may do this as a political statement. They may do this for a cause, sorry. Or they may do this as a job to make money. There are people who are living androgynously, meaning they are living their life right down the middle between the gender binary of male or female. They may have a gender-neutral name, gender-neutral hairstyle, gender-neutral way of being, speaking, and to them, the binary is irrelevant. They don't want to be called he or she. They may want to use they or them, even though that's not grammatically correct, but they don't want to be categorized. This last group, I've just listed a sample of all of the possibilities for the gender nonconforming community. There are 100 more other categories that I haven't listed, but basically these are people who just don't feel a need to align themselves with the gender binary of only male or only female. For example, sorry. For example, someone who's genderqueer might feel comfortable having a full beard and wearing a dress. Or someone who is gender blended might live part of their life a little bit more male some days, a little more female some days, and they blend that all together, and that's who they are. So transsexuals are people like me who have this inner knowing that who we are doesn't match the body we were born with. Many of us do want to do whatever's necessary to make everything fit, make everything align, to create harmony inside of us. And that may include living in a new gender role. That may include taking some of the hormones that are available or having some of the surgeries that are also available. It's a hard problem for a lot of us because the general public doesn't really understand transgender, and that includes the doctors and the mental health communities that we reach out to for care. Transgender people have been around throughout history. This is nothing new since the internet came along. Transgender people can be young, old, children, teens. We've been present throughout all cultures, throughout history. We're seeing a lot more transgender people coming out now. Some people ask me, why are there so many more transgender people now? Well, in reality, we've always been here, but society has changed just enough that many of us are feeling comfortable in coming out and telling the world who we are and living our lives authentically. We may not look like when we go to a doctor or a counselor that we're having any gender issues, because it may be very, very difficult for us to share that information with our doctors or our counselors or our family or our spouses or anyone. We may bury this so deeply inside and repress this so strongly that we don't tell anyone ever, and we even hide it from ourselves. Our culture, especially the United States culture, is very rigid about there's only men and there's only women. In reality, there's a whole wide spectrum of how people see themselves on this wide gender continuum. In fact, many cultures have more than 2 genders. Some cultures have as many as 5 different gender roles that are normal for their culture. So all of us have our own unique way of showing the world who we are. And this gender expression, this gender variance is just part of the normal, wonderful diversity of life. Unfortunately, society doesn't understand that necessarily, and that's what creates a lot of the problems for the transgender community. Gender identity refers to that inborn, innate sense of who you are as far as male or female or other. Every one of us is born with our own gender identity. We didn't choose a gender identity. It's not a conscious choice. It is congenital, it is unchanging, and it's unchangeable. Our gender identity is hardwired into our brains at birth. Gender role or gender expression refers to how I choose to show the world who I am by the way I dress, how I talk, how I walk, how I live. And our gender expression may match what body parts we have, but not necessarily. For most people, our gender identity, that sense of who we are inside, matches what genitalia we have. Everything fits, everything is congruent. We call that cisgender. So cisgender is the opposite of transgender. Sexual orientation refers to who you're romantically or sexually attracted to. Gender identity, again, is that sense of who you are inside as far as male or female or one other. So we like to say sexual orientation refers to who you want to sleep with. Gender identity is who you want to sleep as. Or in other ways, sex is between the legs, gender is between the ears. So sex is the anatomic part, what we typically hide under our clothing. Gender identity is that internal knowing of who we are. Gender role is our external statement to the world of who we are. There was a case back in the 1960s of twins that were born, twin boys that were born. During this process of circumcision of one of the boys, something went horribly wrong and this little boy's penis was destroyed. The parents had no idea what to do now. How do we raise this child? They ended up at the clinic of Dr. John Money at Johns Hopkins Medical Center back in the 60s. And Dr. Money believed that if you socialize a child in a specific gender role, that child will grow up knowing he or she is that gender role. And so he did that. They started socializing this child that was injured as a woman, teaching her that she is a woman, and et cetera, et cetera. And Dr. Money wrote these glowing reports about how successful and how wonderful this was. Unfortunately, it wasn't. They were kind of fudging the data quite a bit. When this child eventually got to be 18, age of majority, he started living again as a male because we realized then that you cannot socialize someone into a gender role. It's innate, it's inborn. Eventually this person went on to commit suicide because of all of the turmoil that he had been through. There's a book written about him called As Nature Made Him. So please understand that sexual orientation and gender identity are two completely separate, unrelated things. In fact, a transgender person may consider themselves straight, gay, lesbian, bisexual, asexual, pansexual, whatever. And in fact, some of us, once we go through the powerful hormones that we take, some of us will experience a change in our gender, our sexual orientation. But it's unpredictable whether that will happen or not. Sometimes it's quite a shock. So transsexuals are people like me who feel like their internal sense of who we are does not match our body. This is a medical condition. Many of us don't like the term transsexual because it makes people think this is about sex. It's not. It's about identity. So we prefer the term transsexual. So many transsexual people desire to take hormones to either feminize or masculinize their body and to have some of the gender surgeries that are available. Not everybody can do this. Not everybody can afford doing these steps. Not everybody can health-wise do these steps. Some people know that if they start taking hormones or have surgery, they're likely to lose their spouse or lose their family or lose their job. So some people are not able to do any changes that would make them feel whole or happy. We prefer to be referred to in however we're living. If we're living in the gender role of a female, we would like for you to refer to us with our chosen name and our chosen pronoun. So transition is a term we use to describe this whole process that we go through to make everything fit. There's no one way to transition. It's a unique journey for each one of us. Transition may include living in a new gender role. We call that a social transition. It may include taking hormones and having surgeries that are available. That's called the medical transition. So male to female, someone who is like me, born birth-identified male, transition to female. The medications that are used for this are the female hormone estrogen, typically given by mouth as estradiol, and then an anti-androgen, which is another medication that blocks the production of testosterone. Typically, we use spironolactone. The surgeries that are available for males to females are facial feminization. There's a surgery that changes the shape of the bones of the face to make a person look more feminine. Some people born male have a prominent Adam's apple, so a lot of us want that removed. That's a chondrolaryngoplasty. Hormones will cause some breast growth, but it may not be quite enough to match our frame, so a lot of us will have breast augmentation done. And finally, there are genital surgeries that are available, and they're quite sophisticated now, so that our genitals look and work like any other woman's. 90% of us are orgasmic. It just works great. There are also some surgeries that will feminize the voice. When you're transitioning from male to female, the hormones will not change voice. You have to learn a new female voice, and mine's awful, but anyway. The other thing hormones won't do, it won't remove facial hair. Body hair, yes, but facial hair, no. So facial hair has to be removed, and that's a really fun process. So if you're transitioning from female to male, FTM, we only need to use one medication, and that's the male hormone testosterone. Typically, I prescribe it to my patients as an injection that they do every 2 weeks. The surgeries that are available for the men, most of them do not want to have breasts, so they will have the breast removed, and sometimes a chest reconstruction, meaning they will change the position and size of the nipples to look male. Once the guys are on testosterone, it causes the clitoris to enlarge. So there's a surgery called a metoidioplasty, which releases the clitoris from its surrounding tissues and results in the creation of a small penis. There are also surgeries to create a male organ from other available body parts called a phalloplasty. This is extremely expensive. It's often multiple stage surgeries, and there's still a lot of complications from that. So a lot of the guys do not get that particular surgery done. It's getting better, but it's not quite there yet. Passing is our ability to blend into our daily lives as the people we know we are without being detected as being transgender. Living stealth, some of us, once we've gone through this whole transition process, we're done with it. We don't want to think about it anymore. We just want to live as the men or women we've always known ourselves to be, and we don't ever tell anyone. That's called living stealth. So gender identity dysphoria is a term that's in the diagnosis manual for mental illnesses. Being transgender is not, however, a mental illness. It's a birth condition. However, being in a body that doesn't match who you know you are and living in a society that doesn't understand all of this results in a lot of problems for us. A lot of emotional distress, anxiety, depression, shame, guilt, anger, etc. It's caused because everything just doesn't fit and society just doesn't understand us. So we may withdraw from the world, put up walls so no one can really get close to us. We may resort to substance abuse as a way of easing our pain. Self-harm is not uncommon. If I look at about probably 10% of my patients, I can see evidence that they've been doing cutting as a way of easing their pain. Eating disorders are also a way that people try to cope with this problem they're feeling. Some of us will hate our external genitalia so much we will amputate them ourselves. I've got a couple patients in my practice that have done that. And some of us will try to compensate, overcompensate, by being SEAL team members or paratroopers or whatever, just trying to prove to the world and ourselves that we're men. 40% of transgender patients have attempted suicide, not contemplated, attempted. What causes us to be this way? All current research shows that there is some sort of in utero hormonal imbalance that occurs at the time our fetal brain is developing the gender identity centers. In the first trimester of pregnancy, our genitals will develop and they will differentiate into either male genitals or female genitals. Later in pregnancy, the brain also differentiates into a male brain or a female brain. There are subtle anatomic differences between male and female brains. So something apparently goes wrong about the time that our brains are starting to differentiate into a male or female brain. So some of us are born with a male brain and a female body, or vice versa. So this is a congenital medical condition. How many of us are there? We don't really know because a lot of us are living stealth. But it's been estimated that there are approximately 1.4 million transgender adults in the United States. We think there probably are at least that many kids, but we don't have a study to prove that. There's an organization that I belong to called the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. It's an organization made up of doctors, mental health professionals, speech therapists, physical therapists, nurses, physicians, assistants, etc. And this is a group of people that are dedicated to the care of transgender patients. This organization has created a book, a document that establishes guidelines for how we're supposed to be treated. There are guidelines in there for what kind of mental health care we need, guidelines for what kind of hormones and the hormone therapy we need, and guidelines for the surgery. These are internationally accepted in ethical guidelines for treatment of us. They aren't rules or regulations, they're guidelines, but most doctors and most surgeons follow the guidelines. So the mental health care we need is to first confirm that yes, we truly are trans, and then to deal with the symptoms that we're displaying, whether that might be depression or suicidality, etc. We want the therapist also to help us consolidate and figure out what our gender identity is, and then what we want to do about that. We want the therapist also to help us establish realistic expectations for what hormones can do and what they can't do, what surgery can do, what it cannot do, etc. So the National Center for Transgender Equality, I've been on their board of directors for about 6 years now. We realized this organization is a national organization dedicated to changing federal policy in a favorable way for the transgender community. Under the Obama administration, they were very friendly to the transgender population, and we got over 148 different policy changes done. Some of that is already starting to be unraveled, but we don't know exactly how much. Anyway, this organization realized that if we were going to get new legislation passed, we needed data. We needed to be able to go to lawmakers and say, here's the problem and here's how many people it affects. Here's how it affects us, et cetera, et cetera. So we did the first survey back in 2011 through 2012. That was widely quoted everywhere. It's been used for all different causes and in all different ways. So at that time, we had almost 6,000 people respond to that first survey. So we did it again in 2015 when we had 28,000 transgender people respond to this survey. The findings revealed disturbing patterns of mistreatment and discrimination and startling disparities between transgender people in the survey and the general U.S. population, including some of the most basic elements of life, such as a job, such as having a place to live, getting medical care, and enjoying family and community. So I'm going to show some of the statistics from this. This is probably going to be one of the most depressing parts of the lecture, sorry. But we found some major themes: pervasive mistreatment and violence against the transgender community, severe economic hardship and instability, harmful effects to our physical and mental health, and some of this was compounded if you happen to be one of the minorities, such as trans people of color. Despite the fact that we're having growing visibility and growing acceptance, we still have so many major problems. Those of us who were out to our immediate family, about 60% of us had a family that was supportive. About 18% of us had a family that was unsupportive, and some of us had families that just didn't really care. Some of us get kicked out of our homes. Some of us have violence against us by our parents or our siblings. Some of us voluntarily left our homes and ran away because it wasn't safe at home for us. Some of us were parts of a religious community, and we often get kicked out of our churches. Most of us do eventually find a safe and welcoming religious community. It really makes a big difference whether we have a supportive family or not. If we had a supportive family, only about 27% of us experienced homelessness in some part of our life. Unsupportive family, 45% of us experienced homelessness. If we had a supportive family, 37% of us had attempted suicide. Unsupportive family, 54%. A large percentage of us were experiencing severe psychological distress, much worse if we didn't have a family that was helping us. Changing our identification documents is a challenge for a lot of us. It varies from state to state whether you are able to change the gender marker on your birth certificate or your driver's license. A name change is also a problem for a lot of people because they cannot afford to do it. So only about 11% of the people in the survey had changed all of their ID documents to match who they were. 68% of us report we don't have a single document that shows who we are and how we're living. So imagine trying to go find a job when you're living in your new gender role. Maybe you transition from male to female. You're living as a female, but all of your documents still say male. It's going to be really hard for you to find a job. The cost of doing this is the main barrier for a lot of us. 32% of us report when we didn't have documents that affirmed who we were verbally harassed or denied benefits or service or assaulted. 25% of us report our health care our insurance would not cover the costs of our transition. We also report being denied medical care. It is extremely common for us to go to a doctor and the doctor will say, "I'm sorry, I don't take care of you," kind of people. Varies as to which survey, how much of the time that happens. Somewhere, one survey says 22%, one survey says 50% of people have been told by a doctor they won't take care of them. We do know from another survey that if we can find a doctor who will take care of us, 50% of us report we have to teach the doctor what to do. Unfortunately, transgender medical care, for the most part, is not being taught in medical schools. So we're graduating class after class of young doctors who have no idea what transgender is or how to take care of us. 55% of us report that our insurance companies would not pay for genital surgery in the last year, and 25% said their insurance companies wouldn't pay for hormones. 33% of us who saw a doctor in the last year had some negative experience. That may include being refused treatment, being harassed verbally, even physically or sexually assaulted in a healthcare provider's office. As a physician, I've even had my own peers refuse to take care of me multiple times, which I just don't understand. But anyway, in the last year, 23% of us said we didn't go see a doctor because we knew we were going to be mistreated. Most of us, when we go to a doctor's office, walk in there with the expectation that either we're going to be mistreated or we're not going to get service. And unfortunately, that often proves to be true. 33% of us didn't see a doctor within the last year because we couldn't afford it. We have a lot of stress, as I've mentioned before. 39% reported serious mental stress in the month before the survey. I mentioned the suicide rate of 40%. 7% had attempted suicide within the last year, which is much higher than the national average. Some of us, because we cannot find a job, some of us have to resort to working in the underground economy, doing things that are illegal, perhaps selling drugs, perhaps doing sex work. Consequently, the HIV rate is higher in the transgender community among the population that has to resort to that to survive. Schools are a nightmare for us often. 77% reported some sort of mistreatment at their school. That may include verbal harassment, not being allowed to dress and live in their desired gender role, disciplined for fighting against the rules at the school, physically attacked, more harshly disciplined than other people. And a lot of us left school because it was just such a bad experience. Some of us were sexually assaulted at schools. Our unemployment rate is much higher than the general population, especially if you were Black, Latino, or multiracial, American Indian, or Middle Eastern. The unemployment rate was often 4 times the national average. 16% of us who have ever had a job report we were fired because we're trans. In the year before this survey, 29% said they were fired from their job, they were denied a promotion, or they weren't hired for a job because they were trans. 15% in the last year reported being verbally or physically harassed or sexually assaulted at their job place. Problems with bathrooms is an issue. A lot of us were being forced to use a bathroom that did not match our gender identity, or we were told we had to wear the clothing that did not match our gender identity. We were also told that we could not share that information with anyone, but sometimes our bosses would share that against our wishes. And that put us in jeopardy for our safety sometimes. Homelessness, I talked about some. We also experience mistreatment in homeless shelters from time to time. Some of us resort to working in the underground economy. 12% reported doing sex work in order to survive, 9% in the last year. There's a very high demand from men who consider themselves heterosexual, who want to have intercourse with a transgender woman that has not had surgery yet. So some of us find that that is the only way we can provide a living for ourselves or pay for our surgeries or our hormones. A lot of the times when we really reach out to police, when we've been attacked or assaulted or anything, we get mistreated or assaulted by the police. 57% of us report being afraid to reach out to the police. 22% of those of us who were arrested last year believe we were arrested because we were trans. And typically the hate crimes that are committed against us, we don't even bother to report. In the last year, many of us were verbally harassed or physically assaulted. 47% report being sexually assaulted in their lifetime, 10% in the last year. Intimate partner violence is also an issue. Bathrooms is a big deal lately. We've heard all kinds of state legislatures that are proposing to pass a bill that would force us to use the bathroom that matches our birth certificate, our original birth certificate. 1 in 10 of us report being denied access to a bathroom in the last year. 12% of us were verbally harassed or physically assaulted in a bathroom or sexually assaulted in a public bathroom. 59% of us don't report we don't use a public bathroom for fear of our safety. 30% of us report they don't eat breakfast, they don't eat lunch, they don't drink all day long so that they don't have to use a public bathroom. We're seeing this especially in school-age kids. They're not eating breakfast or eating or drinking all day long so they don't have to go to a bathroom because they're afraid to. Because of that, about 8% of us are starting to develop problems with our kidneys and our bladder by doing that. A lot of us report harassment in public places, in places you wouldn't even necessarily think about, like Department of Motor Vehicles or the Social Security Office or some of those others that are listed there. We are the victims of hate crimes. In usual years, whatever usual is, we average about 1 transgender person killed per month as a victim of hate crimes. And a lot of these hate crimes are way over the top sort of violence, like shot, stabbed, cut up, and burned. I mean, it's very rageful violence. We've already had 7 transgender persons killed in 2017, so we're ahead. So what do we need from you all? We need medical schools and mental health universities and programs to teach, mandatory teaching about transgender care. I'd love for all of you to be an ally for us. If you hear someone saying something derogatory or incorrect about the transgender community, please step up and correct them. Teach others what you've heard today. So I'll end there with questions. Yes.
I have parents who are unfortunately in a very conservative religious community, and of course that's difficult coming from around the western states. They said that they're not ever going to be accepting of the LGBT community, and I was wondering how we can combat that.
I don't have a good answer for you. At least in Tulsa, we're very lucky that we have an equality center, a GLBT center, that has some support groups. And if you can get parents into one of these support groups, it is amazing how much they will change and grow and learn. Otherwise, you're pretty much limited to maybe finding literature for them to read, if they will. Not much else you can do.
Hi, so I was just wondering, do you think that diversity and more diversity in film, as we've seen like with Laverne Cox and stuff like that, would that help with transgender and making it them more, you know, like...
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so, oh my gosh. Okay, so with the rise of like social media dependency, there's been a lot of controversy online. Do you advocate for or against speaking your mind online, or is it just let it go?
I think you've got to make your own personal decision about that. If you feel you're in a place where you're safe, fine. Some of us don't feel safe. Maybe we're in a community, or maybe we're in a group of people that surround us that are not accepting or understanding. And use your judgment. Fortunately, we're seeing more and more and more of us stepping out and saying, this is who I am. We're starting to see more media representations of us, like with Laverne Cox and Caitlyn Jenner and other people that are being out and open. So it's gradually shifting, but we've still got a very long way to go.
What is your biggest piece of advice you could give somebody who feels that they are transgender?
Find good help, competent help. Find support somewhere, whether it be a local support group, maybe a PFLAG organization. There's a lot of good information online. Be careful about that. Some of it's not exactly correct, but there are some good support websites for transgender people. And then try to find some other transgender people to be friends with. It's a rough road.
Well, first off, thank you for your remarks and for your speech. This environment right here is, the environment in the state in general is not very good because it's Wyoming, the culture-wise. And I've had a conversation with a trans friend of mine, and she's like, there's no local support group. And she's like, why don't we start up a local support group? So if you want to help out, contact me after the thing here, and we can get that kind of thing started, because I've seen a lot of what you talked about here locally here, because I work with, I'm trying to get a steady full-time job and stuff like that, and I run into basically the state, the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation will not support me trying to find a full-time job, steady job, as a transgendered person. They've said that a number of times. Now, on the side, my caseworker will try to fudge it a little bit. But officially, there is no, this is a very bad environment for
Pretty
people
much
to.
the same in Oklahoma. It's still a problem. I mean, all of these statistics are real. The patients I see in my medical practice are experiencing all of these things that I just talked about. Some of them on a daily basis with verbal harassment. Some of them are not able to see me maybe more than once because they can't pay for lab work that's necessary, or they can't pay for a doctor's appointment. Even though we've made the office where I work as about as cheap as we possibly can, still some people just can't pay for it. So we've got so much work to do.
Hi. So I was wondering, do you think the transgender community should include people like me who are agender? Because I've experienced some harassment, saying I shouldn't call myself transgender if I am like agender or people who are gender fluid. Do you think the transgender community should include people like me?
I actually do. I really do. I think anyone that has any feelings that are different than the binary ought to be included in this community, because you're going to experience a lot of the same issues. So yeah, I do.
From the research that was done, did they happen to collect any information if there was a difference between discrimination between male to female and female to male transgender people?
I don't know the answer to that. I think yes. I think that information is there. I've just given you just a very brief hint of all the information that's there. The whole report is almost 300 pages. So I would recommend you go to the National Center for Transgender Equality's website and then find this U.S. survey there. And you could probably find that information there. Our organization is just beginning to develop statistics statewide. So we've got a few states done, but we still have to do the rest of the states. But one of these days we'll have information that's broken out down by state, which may be helpful for some of you.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, within recent news with the transgender bathroom rule in North Carolina, that they're canceling, like, they're making such a big deal in North Carolina with canceling. I'm a sports fan. They're canceling NCAA tournaments, football games there, and I think that this issue with transgender bathrooming, is really gotten out of control.
It really
Not
has.
just in North Carolina, but in the country as well. And I just pray God that we live in I think Wyoming is one of the safest communities in the country. And it might not be the best, like, environment, but we rarely hear about, like, crimes and all that nasty stuff here throughout the state of Wyoming.
You know, the bathroom issues are ridiculous. There's never been a case of a transgender person harming anyone in a bathroom. It just doesn't happen. We just want to pee in peace. And people make up this thing that someone's going to dress up like a woman and go into a bathroom and spy on her. There's already laws against that. There doesn't need to be any more. There don't need to be any more laws. And that just doesn't happen. There are a whole lot easier ways for men to harass women than trying to do that. It just doesn't happen. You go to any police report anywhere and try to find evidence that has been a problem. It's not. So we're trying to write a law that fixes a problem that doesn't exist.
Sorry, it's me again, but what do you think might be our jobs as allies or people of the LGBT community in order to show our absolute support for people who are part of the LGBT community?
Talk. Tell your friends. Teach them about us. Most people, one survey I read said that only 8% of the population of the U.S. has ever met a transgender person. So that means a whole lot of people don't know anything at all about us. Teach them. You know, let them know that we're almost normal. Just, you know, share the information you've learned, read more about it, but mainly just talk and support us that way.
And thank you for your time, by the way. I enjoyed it.
So you mentioned something about transgender males or being in the military. As a transsexual male that is in the military, I was just curious if those men that you knew were actually out as transgender, or
Yes, there are some.
so that is allowed. Okay.
The military changed its policy, I don't remember exactly how long ago, it's been a few months ago, that now allows transgender people to openly serve in the military. We've always been there, and a lot of us were in particular duty stations where we could sort of be out. But the official policy in years past was that we were discharged, and they called us mentally unsuitable for service, you know, even though we've been there forever. But finally they've got that changed, so we now can serve openly. Well, thank you all so much for listening. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Arrowsmith.